Hey guys, Preconnotation Points here at the start of a new book. I don't know about the rest of you lot, but I've been a little disappointed with the books that I picked up to do video commentary for. I opened on a huge high note with the plan, and it was miserable and awful. But it was a romance and dealt with issues I felt were better suited for not YouTube. So I've been trying to stick to young adult novels. Stalking Jack was a constant buildup only to come to a crash ending, and both Born at Midnight and Fallen were do-nothing books that never seemed to be going anywhere up until the last couple of chapters, when the author suddenly remembered that books are supposed to have climaxes. So when I saw that Kiera Cass had a new book out, well, for those of you who are just joining me, or as a reminder for my long-term fans, Kiera Cass has another series called The Selection. Think of it like Hunger Games meets The Bachelor, but then throw in the stupidest things that you can possibly think of. Even as I try to sum up the series, even though it's been years since I read it, I can still remember an awful lot about it, because that's just how bad that it was. The plot was basically that a young girl was randomly selected to participate in a bachelor-like competition for the hand of the nation's prince. The narration made it sound like our main character was from an insanely poor background, but how poor could her family possibly be when they lived in a two-story house with a yard, had closets full of clothes, and a fridge full of food? When she gets to the palace, she realizes that her former boyfriend is now a palace guardian, and she has to choose between the prince and her old lover. Oh, and there were rebels there, whom the guards did nothing about. No, I'm serious, that was literally a plot point. In one chapter, the rebels were throwing rocks at the palace windows, and the king himself literally got up to roll down the safety shutters. Not to offer up any spoilers, but the series naturally ended with the main character opting to marry the prince, and then Cass decided to write a sequel, except that she somehow made the world building worse than the first book, and Cass apparently gave up halfway between writing the first book of the sequel and finishing the second book. Oh, but I could probably go on for a while about this series, but those are just some of the worst parts of the book that stuck with me the most. Now, I'm telling you all of this because a lot of people are saying that The Betrothed seems an awful lot like the next installment of the Selection series, and as such, I'm probably going to be making a lot of references and callbacks to the Selection series. Don't worry if you haven't read that series, because I'll try and explain as I go along. So yeah, here's hoping that this breaks the streak of mediocre novels. Chapter 1. We open on what I'm pretty sure is a Disney princess, Hollis. It was a time of year when the sunrise still had frost on it, but winter was fading and the flowers were starting to bloom, and the promise of a new season filled me with anticipation. I've been dreaming of spring, I sighed, staring at the window at the birds sailing boldly across a backdrop of blue sky. This is literally the start to half of the introductions of Disney princesses. She's about 2 seconds from bursting into song right now. Anyway, as Hollis is being dressed by her maid, Della Grace, the maid can't help but express that she thinks that the king has his sights set on Hollis. However, Hollis is certain that it won't be long before he moves on to somebody else. He was handsome and wealthy, and for goodness sakes, the king. He was also a fair dancer and most entertaining to be around as long as he was in good spirits. But I was no fool. I'd watched him flit from girl to girl over the last several months. You'll notice that aside from being a cad, Hollis never once mentions anything about Jameson's personality. For all we know, he has the personality of watching paint dry. Della is kind of upset that Hollis doesn't seem to care for the king's affections, but as Hollis explains to the reader, she's seen King Jameson flirt with pretty much anything remotely female. She circles back to her earlier comment about Jameson moving his attention on soon, and then her parents will find a boring match for her, and this brief moment in her life will be but a happy memory when she's old and gray. Somebody delivers a letter to Hollis's room, although Della decides to play a game with Hollis, insisting on playing keep away with the letter since it appears to be from the king and Hollis has no interest in him. Hollis manages to catch her servant friend just as Hollis's mother bursts into the room. She chides Hollis for acting like a child and name drops a bunch of other girls around Hollis's age who are either engaged to be married already or will be soon. But since this is the first time that we're hearing these names, since we have no context for any of this, and since we especially don't know how old anybody is in this world, this passage is meaningless. Granted, Hollis is of marrying age, but this is also labeled as a historical fantasy. Girls as young as 10 years old were married. Maybe Hollis is literally still a child. We just don't know. Della is quick to remind the mother that Hollis currently has the king's eye. We all know that the king's eye is prone to wander, and Hollis isn't quite queen material, wouldn't you agree? Ouch. I seem to recall that the mother from the selection wasn't exactly the mother of the year material either, or the queen from the selection. I think that Cass has exactly one stereotype of mother in her mind and she doesn't know how to write anything else. And then because implying that her daughter wasn't amazing wasn't enough, the mother then says this to Delia. Besides, she added, are you really in a position to talk about anyone's potential? There isn't an oubliette deep enough for her. I'm on page 2 and I hate it already. Thanks. Having insulted every person in the room, the unnamed mother then makes her leave. Hollis opens a letter and asks for Delia's help in setting her hair and dress right again after their chase, since the king has asked to meet her later. Delia can't help but point out to Hollis how eager that she is to meet the king, despite Hollis's insistence that all of this was, and I quote, a game. And then that's the first chapter. As far as first chapters go, it was a chapter, I suppose. We introduced our main character as well as the overall plot, I suppose, but it wasn't nearly half as awful as I'd been expecting, but it's probably a bit longer than 2 full pages. I'm going in fully expecting a train wreck, but for once I'd like to be pleasantly surprised by what actually happens in a book. Chapter 2. So Hollis goes to meet the king, looking into a beautiful set of honey brown eyes. Is it weird that Cass felt the need to establish exactly how many eyes that the king has? Well, it wouldn't be weird if he had an eye out, or if he had 8 eyes like a spider, but 2 is usually assumed to be the number of eyes a person has. Something about the deep and purposeful attention he bestowed upon me whenever we were together made me feel a little like I did when Della Grace and I were dancing and I'd spun around too quickly, slightly warm and dizzy. In case you were confused as to who the love interest was, here it is spelled out for you. Hollis expresses her delight that Jameson remembered her saying that she liked the river. Jameson then apologizes for needing to invite Hollis's parents along, and that's when Hollis realizes that they aren't nearly half as alone as she had originally imagined the two of them being. In fact, I spotted Norn looking down her nose at me with Anna Sophia and Cicely right behind her, smug in their certainty that my time would soon to end. This is literally just the selection. Cass isn't even trying to pretend like it's not right now. They are going to be riding boats on the river, but in order to get to the river, they have to take carriages down. Hollis is forced into a carriage with Jameson, but also her father, who immediately turns to the king and starts to talk politics. And as I'm reading through the two men talking shop, I'm like, a crumb of context would be nice, thanks. Especially because it's described in great detail and not simply glossed over. The worst part is that I fully expect for all of this political nonsense to come back later. Once they get to the river and exit the carriage, Jameson expresses how much he hated the ride to Hollis. Hollis agrees that her parents are pretty miserable. Delia exits her own carriage, which she had to share with the other girls previously mentioned. Delia seems upset and Hollis asks what happened. Delia is vague, implying that it's happened before. However, this is literally the second chapter of a new series, and again, a crumb of context would be nice. They then go to get on the boats. As promised, only Hollis and Delia get to ride with the king and his own advisors. Meanwhile, Mummy and Daddy, as well as the other girls, have to ride on other boats. It honestly kind of makes me wonder why they even agreed to go along, knowing full well that they would not be able to ride on the boat with Jameson himself. And then, because this book has a one-track mind, the descriptions of their boat ride are randomly interrupted so that Hollis can describe what Jameson looks like. He's handsome. But don't worry, since I'm sure that the book will go out of its way to remind us of this fact at least every couple of chapters. They always do. And then the book decides to info dump on us about some of the customs of the people who live here and some of the previous queens whom history remembers more than the kings. And all of this info is shoved onto us all at once, all without any sort of actual connection to the actual plot, which makes me frustrated because why should anybody care about this? Is this going to be relevant later? Is this unimportant? Who knows? The book having now wasted 2 whole pages on describing nothing of importance to the reader, we now return to our actual plot. Jameson turns to Hollis to make awkward small talk with her. He mentions that many newly married couples often make trips together, and when Hollis says that she's never seen a beach, Jameson said that she'll have to go to one with her husband. In true romance novel fashion, Hollis is determined to overthink this. And then, because that was too much seriousness, Hollison turns and chucks a berry at Nora on the next boat over. This results in the other girls chucking berries across at Hollis while she returns fire. And I'm circling back to the idea in my head that these girls are all literally 12 years old. And then, because this scene wasn't romantic, Hollis ends up leaning too far over the railing and falls into the river. Jameson is quick to pull her out of the water and puts his coat over her to keep her warm, despite the fact that when they got onto the boat, Hollis explained to the reader that there were furs to keep them warm. But the romance! Ugh, nothing quite like forgetting what you'd written 3 pages earlier. They return to where they left from, where Nora is insanely apologetic over the entire thing, but despite the fact that Nora is being nice to Hollis, the second that Delia tries to do her job as Hollis's maid, suddenly Nora gets all bitter and mean with no actual reason. Seeing as you never had a chance of getting Jameson's attention on your own, holding on to Hollis's skirts is the best a girl like you could do. Once, I just want for some minor character in a book to be like, girl, I don't want him. He smells like ketchup. Not every single female in your book needs to be head over heels in love with the central love interest. Kate thinks bye. Hollis wants to defend her friend's honor, but Delia stops her. Hollis just fumes over the entire thing and thinks about how the two sexes fight with each other. The next morning, Delia is getting Hollis ready for the day, and a bunch of servants come in with flowers from Jameson. In the event that you have caught a cold and were unable to venture out into nature today, I thought that nature ought to come to its queen. Hollis is naturally insanely taken aback by Jameson's use of the word queen. And with that, the second chapter comes to a close. And as I try to think of the words to wrap up this chapter, the only thing I can think of is this. This chapter had about 6 pages in it, but barely enough plot for about 3. Literally half of this chapter was spent on random politics and random world building. Zero context for either of these things. But yeah, if I didn't know that this was another Kiera Cass novel, I'd be like, this reminds me a lot of a Kiera Cass novel. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss anything. Also, while you're waiting for the new video next week, be sure to catch up on my other video series. If you've already caught up with that, then you can head over to Tumblr for my main book Snarks, always free and updated daily. People who support me on Patreon also have early access to my daily Snark, but also bonus Snark that isn't up anywhere else. People who donate to me either by supporting me on Patreon or by making a one-time donation via PayPal or Coffee also get shoutouts in my videos. Thank you so much to Don and Phoebe for supporting me already. Be sure to join my Patreon or donate to hear your name next week. Also, if you want to read some of the stuff that I've published, and you can purchase my works on Amazon, I have 17 erotic short stories, 1 short story collection, and 1 full-length novel. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys! In fact, I spotted Nora looking down her nose at me with Anna Sophia and Cecilia right behind her. How do you even pronounce this name?